For the handful of you not in the know, many moons ago I made a series of videos on fan-favorite Sentai season Gokaiger. It ended up being a considerably more involved and much more passionate project than I ever could have anticipated, which worked out pretty well. I don't think it would have been as fun to talk about if it ended up disappointing me instead. Dino Fury is one of those exceptions to that rule of sorts since, admittedly, it continued to find unique, bordering on accidentally creative ways to undercut itself time and time again. But that's neither here nor there. Because now, it's time to fulfill the last part of the promised Gokai content train with our last stop, Ten Gokaiger, a movie that fittingly released 10 years after the events of the season proper. If you're new to this series and haven't seen my other Gokaiger videos yet, consider giving those a watch since I'm mostly operating off the logic of continuing the conversation and not recapping the conversation. With all that said, what exactly is Ten Gokaiger? For one thing, it's my first ever direct experience with the years after legacy movie format started in earnest when Hurricaneger had theirs back in 2013. The trend has since gained traction and has continued with seasons able to reacquire their leads for one last dance. Or so we thought, since more recently, seasons celebrating their 20th anniversaries have gotten second stabs at legacy movies too. All while working Naruhisa Arakawa to the bone, writing up a huge chunk of them. Ten Gokaiger is no different on that front, as Gokaiger's lead writer, unsurprisingly, returns here to lend his penmanship to proceedings. Sadly, the other creative lead behind Gokaiger, and easily among modern Sentai's best writers Junko Kimura, is not present, nor has she been for any V cinema film, even ones featuring teams she was the head writer for. The reasons behind that are ones only she could answer, but the story we got probably could have used her. Now, I don't say that to be fully taken as a lead into the answer to the broader question of how I feel about this movie as a whole. Ten Gokaiger is a film that has its moments, many of which relate directly to the season it carries on from. But the area I really want to highlight first diverges rather sharply from what we've come to expect from this team's story, very unlike the first Gokaiger movie that has the feel and plotting of a standard episode, but obviously longer. This digs into some territory I find really interesting, albeit somewhat tangential with respect to spandex superheroes, but if you watch my videos with any degree of frequency, you probably saw that coming. Don't worry, I'll get to the big explosive fun stuff too, but right now, let's talk about the Super Sentai Derby Coliseum. I suppose it's fitting that I'm making this review now, because in the now, the topic of betting, specifically as it pertains to sports betting, which I'd argue this falls under, has never been more frontward facing. It's on the front of jerseys, it's a sponsor for nearly every sports content creator on Earth, and maybe some on Mars too, and multiple sports TV stations will have an ad or three tucked in there, all coinciding with laws and regulations loosening up all over the world, including Japan. Now, some of this does post-date when Ten Gokaiger was written and produced, but the writing's been on the wall for a while now. The Coliseum fits pretty cleanly into the frame of the heavily regulated public sports betting industry in Japan. With the exception of pachinko machines, which are still part of the problem but get around Japanese laws by way of having historical and cultural relevance, most forms of gambling outside of that are very much illegal in the country, and the stigma around gambling there is very much not positive. Yet, their gambling market, due in no small part to illegal practices, is still among the highest on the planet, and the reported losses of money due to gambling being top 5 in the world speak to that. What's worse, the rate of gambling addiction, while not even the highest in just Asia, is still pretty damn high. It's a problem, any way you slice it, and one that some fear will only grow in the years to come. For those reasons and many more, a majority of polled Japanese people oppose the legalization of casinos. So given all of that background, I'd argue the lens Arakawa and his production team presumably viewed this from is how taboo gambling might not be given enough time. There's been several unsuccessful pushes to further legitimize this business for decades, from the mayors of individual cities to entire political parties looking for ways to boost tourism and revenue. It took until 2018 to enact the aforementioned legalization of casinos in the country after the Integrated Resort Enabling Act passed 2 years prior. 2 years after legalization, the Japanese government established the Casino Administration Committee, and now everyone from MGM to the Las Vegas Sands is trying to get their foot in the door. And all of that's to say nothing of how online gambling's ease of access and increased use over the years could still prove to be a bigger needle pusher than any 5-star resort. The point being that 10 Gokaiger, true to its roots, looks to highlight a topic impacting the country right now that can and likely will change a lot about how Japan operates economically as well as socially. I don't know if this is more of an Arakawa thing or a Toei desire to keep using Gokaiger specifically for these types of stories, but it tracks either way. Because if you did need to make a 10 years after movie to discuss how the country you saved has changed since you were there, why not touch on a matter that's been steadily gaining steam in the interim? As far as world-changing topics go, this certainly wasn't their only option, but broadly speaking, it's really one of the only ways to narratively progress a team that's only other major story arc was the need to see themselves, the past Sentai, and this planet as all having a legacy worth preserving. That's all well and good. But the plot as laid out here begets a sizable question. Why would every single Sentai team be okay with this? Now, again, I don't know every single member of every single team, not by a long shot, but I do know some of them pretty well, and many of them would see this as problematic for a myriad of reasons. The Shinkenger powers being passed down through the generations is a major foundational story element, so I don't think any of them would agree to have hollow husks fight for sport while donning the symbols some of their ancestors sacrificed everything for, least of all Kaoru. Lest we forget, she straight up adopted Takeru just for the sake of making his Shinken Red reappointment more legitimate. She ain't having any of this nonsense. The Lupin Rangers might just be young and new agey enough that the gambling aspect wouldn't be an immediate deal breaker. For one thing, laws don't hold a lot of sway for them, and for another, their motif fits the billing for that sort of high-rolling aesthetic more than any other team. But I don't think any of them have enough trust in government institutions to willingly donate their powers for the financial gain of a government institution. Flipping our focus to older teams, a lot of them would definitely see gambling in any form as a net negative, even though a lot of them worked for the government or some secret arm of it and have more faith in their institutions for good or for ill. They're part of a culture that sees gambling as a social evil, and whose people have largely tried to oppose its sources of proliferation. At the very least, some of them wouldn't like this purely on principle. And yes, they do make sure to tack on a throwaway line about using the funds for defending the Earth and getting your powers back for emergencies, but that's a little weak to me. I get it, the film's only an hour plus and barely that, but we have no indication as to how they're actually using these defense funds. We do get the implication, however, that the defense they probably want is a brainless legion of Sentai suits enforcing martial law whenever they might see fit. And that's neat enough to deserve a larger focus, especially since I like the idea that some government bigwig would be greedy enough to see Bosco's old tech as an immediate business venture. But what it comes down to is how off it feels to treat every past Sentai team in a weirdly monolithic way, even though not every suit from every season was ever going to make a cameo here anyway. That was their opening to say that some individual members of teams, if not entire teams, are still on the fence or rejected this plan outright. Now, to be clear, I've come to adore and appreciate this particular team and their pirate shenanigans. The fact that they misled the Antags here and got the drop on them under the guise of a falling out fits like a glove. The fact that they've done a bit of gambling themselves and still see this whole farce as a farce is a neat and quiet nuance to include. But it also creates the implication that they're the only team, minus Guy, able to see through such a clear-cut corporate scam. Even factoring in their exclusive experience dealing with the Bakut pirates, it all circles back to how so many otherwise well-meaning former heroes agreed to a setup this obviously predatory. And that's to say nothing of how the moral quandary of using the Ranger keys of Sentai who have passed away may have been skirted around. In spite of my critiques, however, there are still some details I liked within this framing. First and foremost, I'm not especially fond of the added guy exposure we get here, likely by virtue of other actors having busier schedules to work around. But, in a way comparable to Bo Lin circa Season 4 of The Legend of Korra, I'm always fond of the idea of the good-hearted but not especially forward-thinking member of a team being duped by bad people because they told him exactly what he needed to hear. For all his misgivings, Guy is another example of someone who would likely have reservations about using Sentai powers in the same way we use boxing, for example. But tell him it's all going to this nebulous defense budget and suddenly they have their mascot. It fits with who Guy is and his desire to see the Sentai legacy burn bright, even if by alternative means he doesn't fully understand. I also really like the return of Swordsman Kid, though here played by a different actor, who has taken his need to fight all the way to one of the highest offices and near immediately feels like something's gone awry. Though I can't help but wish he got his own in-suit moment too, if only for a second, to pay off his very first appearance and how he couldn't manage the power then, but likely could now. I always viewed him as an important and uniquely vulgar checkpoint for how Marv views things like strength and value. So it's neat that someone on the production staff agreed and made a point to bring him specifically back. I also think the Bakut Pirates and the Minister of Defense are, at least conceptually, great ideas. Assuming the production team really did think hard about a lot of the negative impacts of gambling and why it's been such a hot topic for years, it makes some sense that this merry band of pirates who aren't Sentai would see this as a path towards potentially upending another civilization. Now, obviously gambling in most forms doesn't really have the power to do that, even for as questionable as the biggest stakeholders in the industry are. Compared to squashing civil liberties, defunding and disenfranchising public institutions, and about 1,000 other things happening in the world right now, it's not even getting a seat at the table. But, when tied to the agendas of government arms, it's at least a start. And the film makes it somewhat clear that, given time and further finances, the defense minister's endgame here is money and control, not defense. But we also know that the only thing that was going to end up being defended is the interests of the invading pirate gang. They started this, and they surely would have finished it if given the chance. But the film doesn't let humans off the hook that easily, as Swordsman Boy spells out for us. The defense minister being fully human and still fully agreeing to this entire operation, as well as coming off perhaps a touch shadier than even the pirates, is telling and important. I think this film loses something without the acknowledgement that the systems we lean on are many a time actively participating in throwing us under the bus. And it's not just using power and influence to suck up financial resources from people blissfully unaware of your schemes. Their real trick was getting people to cheer for the fall of Captain Marvelous, and in so doing, unwittingly continue to fund their own demise. It almost reaches a point of true eeriness, but stops just short in order to keep the back-end focus on the Gokaigers reuniting. So while I think the film's central conflict is something they could have put a bit more thought into, the writing did just enough to give us some interesting angles and moments worth discussing. This production team is very clearly wary of the direction gambling might go, especially as a social mechanism, and after generations of seeing how strictly it was regulated, even if not altogether effective in that regulation, it's an understandable perspective to have on a topic worth scrutinizing. And now, let's move on to the fun stuff most of you are probably here for. So, how does Ten Gokaiger work as an anniversary for the Gokaigers themselves and Sentai more broadly? It's a pretty good time, all things considered. We talked a bit about all the returning suits and faces and how clever it was to use Guy in the way they did, but some of the cameos here are pretty wild. The main suit over here is played by Tsuyoshi Matsubara, a member of Project R, the musical group behind the Gokaiger theme song and a host of other Toei tracks. The other two are actually Kamen Rider alums. One played Miu in Kamen Rider Forze, and the other played Bravo in Kamen Rider Gaim. The announcers are even easier to recognize, as one is literally Bosco's actor, and the other is a super Sentai alum, if there ever was one, having portrayed Maggiello and Beatbuster from Magi Ranger and Go Busters respectively. It's a real who's who of appearances, capped off by Kire May Silver showing up so Aim could grab a MacGuffin and be on her way. But placing the focus on the main cast, the movie does an excellent job at giving us that as if they never left type feeling. Of course, Aim's charm and sensibility would be needed to acquire the aforementioned MacGuffin from a member of a different royal family, but also not shying away from action when necessary. Of course, Joe would show up when necessary and stand up for his man. Of course, Marv would get himself nearly beaten to death for his pride, but also because he's correct to question the ways they're using Sentai powers. And of course, Luca would be best served to sell this deceptive ploy and set everything into motion because she's Luca and she's very, very good at out-gambling gamblers. Hard to say if Doc getting himself into debt was part of the plan or not, since that really does feel like the type of trouble he'd get into all by himself. But if that was an act, then he's gotten way better at holding on to a facade. Even though only a small portion of the film has them all together, that walk down mixed in with the impossibly hard backing track is everything a fan of the series could ask for. And their fight choreo is still as on point as ever, seamlessly instilling every shot, slash, and jab with a boundless amount of personality. And just for fun, why not finally finish that curry meal from all the way back in episode 1? The final act of this movie looks and feels pretty amazing. Even the most obvious of nostalgic drops feel fitting. I do find myself wishing there was more to say about all of that, but maybe there shouldn't be. What you see is what you get feels like a mostly complimentary observation in this context. If you've seen it, you know there are some moments that only mean something because this team meant something to you. Like, my eyes lit up when Doc and Luca referenced their body swap episode by swapping powers instead. Just like having Swordsman Boy back as a young adult, questioning whether his younger words still carry weight, it's another instance where they remembered an episode that meant something to me beyond its wacky, legally mandated premise. All in all, Ten Gokaiger is a pretty good time for those reasons and more, but also a pretty short time. Again, I do feel like some of my misgivings, including most of the team feeling like a second or third priority until the plot progression starts speeding up, would be solved with a longer runtime. If you're going to make the scourge of gambling the sort of main textual, sort of subtextual villain here, two very doable things by Toei standards come to mind. 1. Unmonolith all the Sentai that unilaterally agreed to this, somehow. There's zero reason to think all of them would take to this in the same way Guy did, minus the Guy-isms. And 2, offer some perspective on the people that suffer most because of the industry's exploitative methods. With an extra 20 minutes, give or take, you can easily fit in a scene where someone without self-control is making a financially irresponsible decision because in their mind, they have to. Because in their mind, this is just a leisure activity for entertainment and not a health problem. We temper our expectations for movies like this, sure, but there's no doubt that a few realistic changes here and there would have sold the idea a lot harder and made the triumph over it a lot sweeter. And even if you don't care about any of that, which is fair, you still end up with a movie that sort of makes you earn the fun parts by sitting through such scenes as Guy screaming, and Guy screaming, and Guy screaming. When it's good, it's great, and when it's a little more murky, you can either overthink the details, like me, or you can opt to let it roll off your back until Luca inevitably calls someone an idiot. Either way, there's a little something for everyone. So, as always, let me know your thoughts on Ten Gokaiger down below, and if you want to like and share this video so that more people see it, that's very much appreciated. No idea what I'll jump into next, or if next means a whole other Sentai, so consider that my non-committal answer to the inevitable questions I'll get about that topic. For now, I'll just look back fondly on my work as I close the book on Gokaiger. And to all of you, thanks for watching.